Hey guys, it's Kyle from MAPerformance, and today we're going to talk about engine internals and why you should consider upgrading them. And we're going to talk about each one, what they do, and what the benefits, and also what the different styles of each individual parts is, and kind of where the benefits lie, and what makes sense for you. With all of these parts, when we're talking engine internals, there's going to be one thing that I'm going to hammer home to you for all of you kids back at school right now. A lot of this stuff is very application specific. There's not really a good one size fits all kind of thing when we talk about upgrading internals. And that's not to say that these don't cross over a little bit, but to maximize, the power and strength of everything, you have to kind of think about what is your end goal and what is the application that you're going to be using this engine for. The first thing that we're going to go over is something that I actually don't have in front of me, and that is your engine block. So up here or somewhere around here, my boy Tyler behind the camera is going to throw up a graphic. On one side, we're going to have an open deck engine, and the other side, we're going to have a closed deck engine. What does this mean? Well, if you look on the top of the deck of the engine, a closed deck engine actually has some material around the sleeves, around the cylinders, that help hold that cylinder in place under load. So this doesn't allow, or shouldn't allow, for this cylinder to move around under power, and this will lend to less cylinder distortion under high load applications. And what does this mean for you? This means that your cylinder isn't gonna blow apart. You're not gonna end up with a hole in the side of your cylinder wall. Staying with the theme of the stuff that we do here at MAPerformance, typically, a lot of our Japanese engines come factory open deck. But fear not, there are solutions for you. These include aftermarket sleeves that are set up to convert your open deck block to a closed deck configuration. This is a little bit more of an expensive journey, a little bit more time consuming. However, it is something that's available to you, and with this, the sleeve liner themselves are a lot stronger than your factory. We actually offer for some of our in-house engines, and this is also something you can do if you're building an engine at home. There's a company that offers a service called CSS. This is Cylinder Support System. And what this essentially is, a machined press fit closed deck solution that allows most open deck engines to be converted to a closed deck configuration. Drawbacks and cons of going closed deck. The biggest that we've typically seen is the cooling capabilities.
You are not sending me to the cooler.
Now, as you're adding material inside of the cooling jackets, we typically see or can see a little bit higher engine running temperatures just because you have less coolant flowing up into the head, you have less coolant around the actual cylinders themselves. This typically isn't an issue, but it is something that you should be aware of, that it may be that your engine runs a little bit hotter when you're going to a closed deck system. Now, this is kind of a trade-off where you gain a little bit of strength, add a little bit of heat, but it's not to say that the added heat is going to be a detriment to your reliability. The next thing that you're gonna see when you open your engine up is these lovely little guys right here, your pistons. So in front of me, I have offerings from Wiseco. This is a stage 1 and a stage 2 piston. They look very similar, although they are not the same. And we're gonna talk about the benefits of a forged piston and what it makes sense when you're choosing for your application. Our stage 1, much larger skirt, still a good amount of material here. This is a good drop-in solution for those mid to high range power levels. With this too, with a stage 1, you still have a very OEM style oiling ports in the piston themselves, in the gas ports as well. And then your wrist pin bosses are generally thicker than stock. However, there is room to grow there. These are obviously very good piston choices for your moderate, I wouldn't say entry-level builds, but when you're starting to kind of crank the boost up and crank the power up, it's important that these stay together. Also too, with aftermarket pistons, you generally have a little bit of selection when it comes to compression ratio. We won't get too much into that, but essentially that's going to change the engine characteristics, how it makes power, where it makes power, and also its susceptibility to knock. So this is the stage 2 offering. The thing that you might notice off the bat that's very apparent is the lack of a full skirt. This is done to create less friction against the cylinder wall itself while the piston is traveling up and down, which generally means a more efficient engine. That's what you want. A little bit less stability. However, when you're making big power like this, that's kind of a trade-off that's worth having. Also with this stage 2 piston, we have a little bit larger oil ports and also a much larger wrist pin boss. What comes after your piston and after your wrist pin? Well, it's your rod, of course, silly goober. Class is in session. So in front of me, I have 2 different constructions of rods. We have an IBeam rod and an HBeam rod. What I'm missing in front of me, these are both a forged steel rod. I don't have an aluminum rod in front of me, and I do not have a titanium rod in front of me. Titanium's obviously very light, very strong. It's also a very high cost. Aluminum rods, also very light, very strong. However, being that they are aluminum, they have a little bit different characteristics than steel that lend them to not be the most forgiving in the sense of longevity and the kind of maintenance that you have to do with them. Aluminum rods can stretch over time, which means that they are treated more like a service item in the sense that you need to be checking and being aware of the actual length that the rods themselves are. After we got that stuff out of the way, we'll talk about our HeadStuds and our IBeam. These are typically what you're gonna see in a more street strip style engine setup. The HeadStuds rod generally comes in, the cost kind of varies dependent on design and manufacturer. However, typically the HeadStuds is a little bit cheaper just because a lot of times they're making much more of these and the construction themselves. The HeadStuds is a little bit lighter than the IBeam. However, this can be a trade-off in the boosted engine applications as you start to increase the cylinder pressure. You will actually see these rods start to bend, and they'll kind of, you know, when you get a little tickle on your neck, you kind of go like this. The same thing kind of happens in this channel here of the HeadStuds rod, and they'll bend and fold these out. So that is an issue. These are great for NA applications. Like I said, you can generally get these relatively inexpensive because they are highly produced. And they do work well for those kind of mid-range turbocharged builds, but you know, once you start to get into the more high boost, high load applications, the IBeam is typically what you will see people running. Another thing to note about IBeam rods versus an HeadStuds is the actual physical size of them. As you can see, as I hold these up next to each other, the HeadStuds is much larger. And what this can mean, specifically for a lot of these smaller displacement engines, or even a tightly packaged internal engine, is you may have to make clearances within the block to even accept an HeadStuds rod, which isn't necessarily a trade-off in the sense of it's not detrimental. However, it's something that you should be aware of. Like I said, the IBeam is a solid construction, a little bit heavier, however, typically a little bit stronger, especially in those high boost, high load applications. So now we're gonna work our way back up the engine to our cylinder head and talk about the cylinder head itself and some components involved in that. The first thing that we're gonna go over is our camshafts. Like Kelford as well, that make some awesome camshafts that for your specific applications. This next to me is a stock Evo 10 camshaft, and we're gonna talk about when it's time to upgrade your camshaft. So what's the camshaft's job to do? Its job is to open the valves, silly goose. When you go to an aftermarket camshaft, typically what you're going to see changed is the lift and duration of the cam. And what does this mean? Well, very simply, the lift, how far is the valve being opened, and the duration, how long is it being opened for? And I sound like a broken record here, but like I said, this is very application specific. There's different styles of duration and lift for different applications, and it's very important that you match these to the application that you're using. Typically higher lift, more air in, more air out lends to higher power. But another thing to think about too is idle quality. So if you have a very large lift cam, very large duration camshaft, it is typical to have issues holding that engine at a very low RPM. It's the air is sort of unstable when you have so much lift at such a low engine speed. After talking about camshafts, next thing that you're gonna wanna think about when you're selecting your camshaft is the porting that is done to the intake and the exhaust ports themselves. Do you have a OEM port job? Do you have a cleaned up, deburred, very minimal port and polish? Or do you have a full-on CNC followed up by a hand porting, hogged all the way out, port matched to your intake manifold, the most badass thing you can do type porting job? Are you able to actually flow all of that extra air that you're allowing to enter the cylinder with an upgraded camshaft, or vice versa? Do you have a camshaft that's matched to your intake and exhaust porting? These are all things that you need to think about. One of those things, consult your engine builder, consult your cylinder head specialist. What is the right port job for you? Do you need just a port and polish? It's very important that you make the correct choice for your application. With this, the last thing that we're going to talk about when it comes to regards of the cylinder head is your valve springs and valves. We're going to talk really briefly on this. Typically, you will upgrade this alongside of a camshaft upgrade. Most camshafts will call it a spec for the valve spring rate that they want to see with this camshaft, as well as with high boost applications, you need to have the correct spring for the job. So the last thing that we're going to talk about today, while spool is in session, is the thing that brings it all together. The thing that, you know, makes your peanut butter and jelly sandwich, the thing that intertwines it all together. And that's these guys right here. A set of HeadStuds is a upgrade that in my opinion, is never not warranted, at least in a moderate sense. Going from an aftermarket head bolt to a lower tier head stud is always a worthy upgrade in my opinion. At ARP's lower level, they offer what's called the ARP 2000. This is a standard upgrade over stock that provides much more clamping force and it allows you to run a much higher cylinder pressure without leading to a head gasket failure due to actual lifting of the head. It's kind of a crazy thing to think about, but there is an immense amount of pressure within the combustion chamber, so having adequate sealing is very important. So you may be asking, when is the right time to switch from OEM head bolts to a ARP or other head stud? There's something that you want to think about whenever you're taking an engine apart when it comes to head bolts in the OEM configuration is typically they are torque to yield. What this means in a very broad way is they are one-time use. After you torque them to the spec, they are stretched and they no longer return to that length that they were when they came out of the box, so they can only be used once. With these ARP, specifically the ARP 2000s, which is what most people will be dealing with until you get into high cylinder pressure, you need the big stud. These are reusable more than once. They are not a torque to yield stud in most applications. Typically, the standard that I would go by for advising someone to upgrade to head studs is if you are moving from an NA application to a turbocharged application, that would be the time to switch. And if you have a factory turbocharged engine, when you're making about double the OEM output, that is when you would probably start to think about upgrading to head studs. With this is obviously very generalized. You might even want to upgrade to these studs right away. It's all going to be a part of what the engine you have and how the OEMs factored into increased levels of power that weren't accounted for from the factory. So in conclusion, guys, like I beat like a dead horse, just absolutely murdered throughout this entire video, and I'm sure there'll be a counter in the comments below. A lot of this stuff is very application specific, and it's something that you're going to need to be methodical when choosing all of the parts that go together and do your research. If you want help with that research and you want to talk to some guys that know their shit, feel free to give us a call or visit our website at MAPerformance.com and get in touch with our engine department, and they will be able to advise you, at least on the engines that we support in-house, what the right parts for your application is, and get you really set. If not, the sales team is more than happy to help you along your journey in trying to figure out what exactly you need for your engine. And that's pretty much it, guys. It's you're on a fun journey here if you're watching this video trying to figure out what parts to put in your car. If you enjoy watching these back to spool informational videos that kind of cover a wide range of stuff and kind of put the gist of it all in one little video, let us know down in the comments. If we misspoke about anything or if there's something you want to discuss, feel free to leave that below. I know I will be in the comments, happily awaiting your comments. Till next time, guys, see you later. Peace out. Bye. School is out of session.